Hello everyone, I'm Robin the Delta Crafter and I want to thank you for joining me for another video on my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be talking about embossing folders. So I thought I'd start out by showing you kind of my embossing folder collection. Embossing folders are a very inexpensive way to add a lot of texture and creativity to your crafting projects. So my embossing folder collection goes back several decades. Well, not several decades, just a couple decades. Because I never got rid of my embossing folders when I was scrapbooking and things. So I have a large collection of them here. I'm sure there's larger. And I've seen how embossing folders have evolved over the years. So they've gone from kind of like the typical A2 sized, and then they got a little bit bigger to this size. Then they've gone to where they are including, I thought I saw one right here, somewhere here, dies that you can go along with the embossing folder, so that you can easily die cut images out of the that you also embossed. And then like these right here, we now have 3D embossing folders, which also give us a very deep and textured imprint and embossed image on our cardstock. This is how I kind of keep an inventory of my embossing folders. I create little designs of them, and they're all, I think this is 3x3 on a 3x3 piece of cardstock, and I've inked over them, and I keep them on a ring in here. I need to do some updating because I have several new embossing folders, so I just keep that in here so I can kind of keep get a quick look at my embossing folders to see which ones I want to use. So this is my embossing folder collection. So let's talk about different ways to use these embossing folders. So the first technique that we're going to do is called double embossing. And so this technique uses two different embossing folders. This technique works best when you have an embossing folder that has a small, subtle detail, and then a 3D embossing folder that has a wide or broad, detailed image that you're going to be embossing. So first up, we're going to use this 3 dots embossing folder. This is an older folder from Sizzix. I'll try to see if I can find another similar folder to link for you in the description. For all the cards, we'll be using a piece of Neenah Classic Crest Solar White cardstock in the 80-pound weight that has been cut down to A2 size. I spritzed a little bit of water onto that cardstock just so it'll be nice and supple when it goes through the die cutting machine. And you can see here that we have a beautiful 3-dot image embossed onto our paper. We also spritz our paper so we don't get any cracking, and we were able to achieve that. So now I'm going to take that piece of cardstock that I used the 3 dots on and place it into the Beautiful Blooms 3D embossing folder from Spellbinders. And if we take a closer look here, we can see that we have a double embossed image on here. You can see where having that softer, subtle image kind of fades away when you put the paper through the 3D embossing folder. You can see a little bit of texture, which I don't mind on the flowers, but I really love that combined effect. Now let's move on to our second technique, which is inking up our embossing folder. So what you're going to do for this one is you're going to open up your embossing folder and bring in some ink. Now I'm choosing to use some dye ink from Pinkfresh Studio. I've never tried it with pigment inks or hybrid inks. If you have tried that, leave me a comment below and let me know how this turns out for you. The color that I'm using is called Sunshine. So I've gone ahead, placed my piece of cardstock in my embossing folder, spritzed it with a little bit of water, and now I'm taking my ink pad and I'm rubbing it across the debossed side. So this is the side where the image is inset into the plastic of my embossing folder. so that way I can get my ink on the flatter, less raised areas. So I've got my embossing folder all inked up. Notice that I inked more than the area that my paper will cover. That will ensure I get ink all the way to the edge of my paper. I'm going to run it through my die cutting machine, and when I bring it back, you can see that now that ink has transferred to my paper to the flat areas of the paper. The embossed and raised areas they remain white. I just absolutely love the way this yellow and white combination looks with this embossing folder. Now you're going to want to clean the ink off of your embossing folder. So I started off by spritzing some water onto my folder, and then I came in with some stamp cleaner and spritzed some of that on my folder with a Microsoft fiber cloth, and I rubbed it across there, and I was able to clean the ink completely away from my folder. Now for this technique, we're going to be using some white pigment ink from Hero Arts. But there's also going to be a bonus technique. So we're going to use some distress inks as well. I have two folders here. Both of them are 3D embossing folders. So I have a Beveled Diamonds folder from Spellbinders. And then I also have the Intertwine 3D embossing folder from Holtz. I switched my cardstock up a little bit because for both of these techniques, having colored cardstock works best. So I'm placing a piece of cardstock. Both of them have been cut down to A2 size, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I placed them in my folders, spritzed a little bit of water, and now I'm going to take them to my die cutting machine and run them through. And now you're going to see what having the embossing looks like for with these two embossing folders, which is beautiful on its own. I've used both of these embossing folders several times for cards. So now we're going to take things up a notch by giving that embossing some definition and dimension. So I'm taking the white pigment ink and I'm lightly rubbing my ink pad across my embossed image. This way I'm only catching the raised areas of the embossed image. And you can see it's really bringing that image out and bringing it to life. Now you can rub as much as you want, but make sure that you're using a soft hand when you're rubbing this, because you want to try to avoid getting the ink down into all the recessed areas of your image. Now because this is a pigment ink, we're going to have to let that sit to the side and dry for a little bit. We know that pigment inks are thicker and they just need a little bit more time to dry. So our bonus technique is to use just regular dye or dye inks. In this case, I'm using distress ink. This Intertwine embossing folder looks kind of like basket weave. It could also be a wicker fence or something like that. So I decided to take some vintage photo and some walnut stain inks and rub those across different areas of the embossed image to kind of give us a little bit more dimension and detail and bring that embossing out and make it shine even more with this inking. So I've already done the vintage photo, and you can see I just went over just a few areas with that walnut stain. That walnut stain is pretty dark, so I don't want to cover up my vintage photo. So here's a closer look at what the white pigment ink looks like. And here's a closer look of our regular dye inks, distress inks. I love it. Love, love, love what this does, how it enhances our embossed images. So off camera, I went ahead and used all the backgrounds that we created and made some cards. I used some sentiment dies from scrapbook.com. And I also used some Lovely Layers floral dies from Honeybee Stamps. I'm going to give you a closer look at the cards that were made using the backgrounds we created today. Let me know in the comments below if you've used any of these techniques before with your embossing folders, or which technique was your favorite. I hope you all have enjoyed working with me and watching this video today. If you have, please consider giving this video a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel. I'll be sure to list as many of the products as I can in the description box below. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at The Delta Crafter, and you can visit my website and blog at thedeltacrafter.com. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. I hope you have learned something, and I hope that you have a chance to get in your craft room and create some crafts today. Until next time, everyone, enjoy!